A mass grave is a grave containing multiple human corpses, which may or may not be identified prior to burial. The United Nations has defined a criminal mass grave as a burial site containing 3 or more victims of execution. Although an exact definition is not unanimously agreed upon, mass graves are usually created after many people die or are killed, and there is a desire to bury the corpses quickly for sanitation concerns. Although mass graves can be used during major conflicts such as war and crime, in modern times they may be used after a famine, epidemic, or natural disaster. In disasters, mass graves are used for infection and disease control. In such cases, there is often a breakdown of the social infrastructure that would enable proper identification and disposal of individual bodies. Mass graves are a variation on common burial, still occasionally practiced today under normal circumstances. Mass or communal burial was a common practice before the development of a dependable crematory chamber by Ludovico Brunetti in 1873. In Paris, the practice of mass burial, and in particular, the condition of the Cimetière des Innocents, led Louis XVI to eliminate Parisian cemeteries. The remains were removed and placed in the Paris underground, forming the early catacombs. Le Cimetière des Innocents alone had 6 million dead to remove. Burial commenced outside the city limits in what is now Père Lachaise Cemetery. A mass grave containing at least 300 bodies of victims of a Mongol invasion of Kievan Rus in the year 1238, was discovered during an excavation in 2005. In Yaroslavl, Russia, the 30 Years' War was Europe's deadliest religious conflict. In the Battle of Lutzen, 47 soldiers perished and were buried in a mass grave. Archaeological and osteological analyses found that the soldiers ranged in age from 15 to 50 years. Most corpses had evidence of blunt force trauma to the head, while 7 men had stabbing injuries. Several mass graves have been discovered that were the result of Napoleonic battles. Mass graves were dug for expeditious disposal of deceased soldiers and horses. Often soldiers would plunder the substantial quantity of corpses prior to burial. Generally, the mass graves were dug by soldiers or members of logistical corps. If these weren't available, the corpses would be left to rot or would be burned. Such examples have been found scattered throughout Europe. There are over 2,000 known mass graves throughout Spain from the Spanish Civil War, wherein an estimated 500,000 people died between 1936 and 1939. And approximately 135,000 were killed after the war ended. Several exhumations are being conducted from information given in witnesses and relatives. Testimonies to the Association para la Recuperación de la Memoria Histórica. These testimonies serve the purpose of helping geophysicists, archaeologists and forensic scientists to locate graves in order to identify bodies and allow families to rebury their relatives. In the summer of 2008, information from these testimonies was used to unearth a 4-meter-long square grave containing 5 skeletons near the town of San Juan del Monte. These 5 remains are believed to be of people that were kidnapped and killed after the July 18, 1936 military coup. Another mass grave from the Spanish Civil War was found using ground-penetrating radar. Eyewitness accounts identified 2 potential locations for an unmarked grave in mountains of Lena, in northern Spain. Both sites were examined and an unmarked mass grave of approximately 1 meter by 5 meters was found. Approximately 100,000 to 200,000 civilians were killed at the start of the Korean War. These people were flagged by the government of South Korea for potentially collaborating with or sympathizing with North Korea. They were arrested and subsequently executed without trial. The sites where the massacres occurred were forbidden to the public. The bodies were considered to be traitors and the act of associating with them was considered treasonous. Despite this, families retrieved bodies from the shallow forbidden mass graves at the massacre sites. In 1956, bereaved families and villages exhumed over 100 decomposed and unidentifiable bodies, ensuring that the complete human skeleton was intact. Each exhumed body was buried in its own, nameless grave, in a cemetery on Jeju Island. There is a granite memorial within the cemetery which bears the cemetery's local name. Graves of 100 ancestors and one descendant. This name functions to express the opposite of how the genealogy should be, as typically many descendants derive from one ancestor. The Chilean military coup against President Salvador Allende occurred on September 11, 1973. The military surrounded the town of Santiago and searched for people hiding in potential guerrilla insurgent locations. Civilians were detained for long periods of time and some disappeared. Following the coup, bodies were abundant in the streets and in the Mapacho River.